There are nights in history that should never have happened. Nights where the natural order broke down, where reason fled, and where an entire community became something unrecognizable. This is the story of one such night. A night when the cobblestone streets of a medieval city filled with movement, not celebration, not riot, not war, something else entirely. Something that defied every law of human behavior. By dawn, the silence that followed would be more terrifying than the chaos that came before. This is the story of the dancing plague, and it began with a single woman who could not stop moving. The year is 1518. The Holy Roman Empire stretches across Central Europe like a patchwork quilt of kingdoms, principalities, and free cities. One of these cities is Strasbourg. Located in the Alsace region, nestled between the Rhine River and the Vosges Mountains, Strasbourg is a thriving urban center. Its population hovers around 20,000 souls. Merchants, craftsmen, laborers, clergy, the city hums with the routine commerce of medieval life. Markets open at dawn, bells ring from the cathedral towers, children play in narrow alleys, women draw water from public fountains, men haggle over grain prices in the squares. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something is rotting. The summer of 1518 is brutal. Heat waves scorch the land, crops wither in the fields, famine grips the region, bread becomes scarce, the poor grow desperate, disease follows hunger like a shadow, syphilis, smallpox, the sweating sickness. Bodies pile up in the streets faster than they can be buried. The church offers prayers, the city council offers nothing. Social tensions simmer, the wealthy retreat behind locked doors, the poor grow angry, hopeless, hungry. In this climate of desperation, the human mind becomes fragile. Superstition thrives. People whisper about divine punishment, about demons, about curses. The world feels unpredictable, dangerous. And in the middle of July, something happens that will confirm every dark fear lurking in the collective unconscious of Strasbourg. Something that will transform the city into a stage for one of history's most disturbing mysteries. Her name is Frau Troffea. History has preserved her name, though little else about her life remains certain. She is a woman of Strasbourg, likely married, likely poor or middle class. On a sweltering day in mid-July, somewhere around the 14th or 15th, Frau Troffea steps into the narrow street outside her home and begins to dance. At first, it seems unremarkable. Perhaps she is celebrating something. Perhaps she has drunk too much wine. Perhaps she is simply eccentric. But as the hours pass, something becomes clear. She is not dancing by choice. Her movements are frantic, desperate. Her feet stamp against the cobblestones in rhythms that seem to have no pattern. No music plays. No musicians accompany her. She dances alone, and she does not stop. Neighbors gather. They watch with curiosity, then concern, then alarm. Frau Troffea dances through the afternoon. She dances as the sun sets. She dances through the night. By dawn, she is still moving. Her dress is soaked with sweat. Her feet are bleeding. Her face is contorted with exhaustion. But she cannot stop. When people try to restrain her, she struggles violently. When they ask her what is wrong, she cannot answer. Her eyes are wide, glassy, unfocused. She looks like a woman possessed. By the second day, Frau Troffea is still dancing. She has not eaten. She has not slept. Her body is failing, but her legs continue to move. The crowd around her grows. Some people pray. Some people laugh nervously. Some people flee. There is something deeply wrong about what they are witnessing, something that violates the natural order. A human being should be able to stop moving, should be able to control their own body. But Frau Troffea cannot. And then, something even more terrifying happens. Others begin to dance. Within a week, 34 people are dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. Within a month, the number swells to 400. Men, women, young, old. They come from different neighborhoods, different social classes, different backgrounds, but they all share one thing. They cannot stop dancing. The afflicted do not dance in unison. There is no choreography, no coordination. Each person moves in their own chaotic rhythm. Some leap wildly, some spin in circles, some simply shuffle their feet in place, hour after hour, their bodies swaying like reeds in a storm. Their faces are masks of agony. Sweat pours from their bodies. Their clothes become rags. Their shoes fall apart. Their feet bleed onto the stones. But still, they dance. The streets of Strasbourg transform into a nightmarish carnival. The dancers move through the city like a plague. They dance in the squares. They dance in the markets. They dance outside the churches. They dance until they collapse from exhaustion, and when they wake, they dance again. Some dance for days without pause, some dance for weeks, and some dance until their hearts give out. The city descends into chaos. Normal life becomes impossible. Markets shut down. Businesses close. Families lock themselves indoors. The smell of sweat and blood and fear permeates the air. The sound is unbearable. Hundreds of feet pounding against stone. The gasps and cries of the dancers. The wailing of their families. At night, the city does not sleep. The dancing continues in the darkness. Torches are lit to illuminate the streets. Shadows twist and writhe against the walls. It looks like hell has opened its gates. Medical authorities are summoned. Physicians examine the dancers and find no physical cause for their affliction. No fever, no poison, no disease that can explain why these people cannot stop moving. The doctors are baffled. Some suggest it is a natural illness, an imbalance of the humors, an overheating of the blood, but their treatments fail. Bloodletting does nothing. Herbal remedies do nothing. The dancing continues. The clergy offer their own explanation. This is divine punishment. God is angry. The city has sinned. The famine, the disease, the poverty, all of it is proof of moral decay. And now, God has sent this plague of dancing as a warning. Priests lead processions through the streets. They pray over the dancers. They perform exorcisms. They call upon Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, to intervene. But nothing works. The dancing does not stop. Desperation leads to madness. The city council, faced with a crisis they cannot comprehend, makes a decision that will haunt Strasbourg's history. They consult with local physicians and astrologers, who propose a theory. The dancers are afflicted with hot blood. Their bodies are overheated. The only cure is to let them dance until the heat burns out, to exhaust the affliction, to dance it out of their systems. And so, the city authorities organize a macabre solution. They hire musicians. They open guild halls and grain markets to provide space. They construct wooden stages in the public squares. They encourage the dancers to keep dancing. Professional musicians play drums, pipes, and flutes. The city pays them to perform day and night. The idea is that if the dancers can move freely, with music to guide them, they will eventually tire and recover. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The music does not cure the dancers, it amplifies the frenzy. The stages fill with writhing bodies. The sound of drums and pipes echoes through the city like a funeral march. More people begin to dance. The affliction spreads faster. What was once 30 becomes 100. 100 becomes 200. 200 becomes 400. The city has turned the plague into a public spectacle, and it has made everything worse. Witnesses describe scenes of horror. Dancers collapse on the stages and are carried away. Some are unconscious, some are dead. Heart attacks, strokes, sheer exhaustion. Bodies are removed and replaced with fresh dancers. The stages become altars of suffering. Blood stains the wood. The smell of death mingles with the sound of music. And still, the city plays on. Families watch their loved ones destroy themselves. A man watches his wife dance until her feet are nothing but raw flesh and exposed bone. A mother watches her son dance until he vomits blood. A daughter watches her father dance until his heart stops. And there is nothing they can do. The dancers cannot hear them, cannot see them. They are locked inside their own bodies, prisoners of a compulsion that overrides every instinct for self-preservation. The psychological toll on the city is immense. Fear becomes paranoia. Paranoia becomes hysteria. People begin to wonder if they will be next, if the affliction is contagious, if it can strike anyone at any moment. Some believe it is spread by sight, that if you watch the dancers too long, you will be pulled into their frenzy. Others believe it is spread by sound, that the music itself is cursed. Families flee the city. Businesses abandon their shops. The wealthy hire guards to keep the dancers away from their homes. And through it all, the question burns in everyone's mind. Why is this happening? In the centuries since the dancing plague, historians, scientists, and medical experts have proposed dozens of explanations. None are entirely satisfying. None can fully account for the scale, the duration, and the sheer strangeness of what happened in Strasbourg. One theory points to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, particularly in damp conditions. When consumed, ergot produces compounds similar to LSD. It causes hallucinations, convulsions, and in severe cases, a condition known as ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire. The symptoms include burning sensations in the limbs, muscle spasms, and psychosis. In medieval Europe, ergot poisoning was common during years of famine, when people ate moldy bread out of desperation. Could ergot explain the dancing plague? It is possible. The summer of 1518 was hot and damp, perfect conditions for ergot to thrive. The population of Strasbourg was starving and would have eaten contaminated grain. Ergotism can cause convulsions that might resemble dancing. But there are problems with this theory. Ergot poisoning typically causes violent muscle contractions, not the sustained rhythmic movements described by witnesses. It also causes severe pain and gangrene, symptoms that were not reported in the dancers. And, most crucially, ergot poisoning affects individuals randomly, not in synchronized waves. It does not explain why the affliction spread so rapidly, or why it affected specific groups of people. Another theory is mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a psychological phenomenon where groups of people develop physical symptoms with no organic cause, triggered by stress, fear, or social contagion. Mass hysteria has been documented throughout history. Dancing manias occurred in medieval Europe several times, though none as severe as Strasbourg. In 1474, a similar outbreak occurred in Aachen, Germany. In 1378, monks in a German monastery reportedly danced and jumped uncontrollably. The conditions in Strasbourg were ripe for mass hysteria. The city was suffering from famine, disease, and social unrest. The population was traumatized. Superstition was rampant. Belief in curses and divine punishment was universal. In this environment, one person's breakdown could trigger a cascade. Frau Troffea begins dancing. Others, already on the edge of psychological collapse, see her and begin to dance as well. The behavior spreads through imitation and suggestion. The city's response, encouraging the dancing, only reinforces the behavior. The stages, the music, the public spectacle, all of it validates the affliction and gives it social permission to continue. This theory aligns with what we know about the human mind under extreme stress. When communities are traumatized, they become vulnerable to collective delusions. The dancing could have been a form of dissociation, a way for people to escape unbearable reality, a psychological break manifesting as physical compulsion. The dancers were not faking. They genuinely could not stop. Their minds had overridden their conscious control. But even this explanation leaves questions. Why dancing? Why not some other form of hysteria? Why did it last so long? And why did it stop? To understand the dancing plague, we must understand the medieval mind. In 1518, the world is not governed by science or reason. It is governed by faith, superstition, and fear. Every event has a spiritual cause. Every illness is a message from God or the devil. And in Strasbourg, There is a particular belief that shapes how people interpret the dancing. Saint Vitus is the patron saint of dancers, epileptics, and those suffering from chorea, a neurological disorder that causes involuntary movements. In medieval folklore, Saint Vitus has the power to both inflict and cure the dancing sickness. If you offend him, he can curse you with uncontrollable movement. If you honor him, he can grant you stillness. This belief is widespread in the Alsace region. Shrines to Saint Vitus dot the countryside. Pilgrimages to his holy sites are common. In the weeks before the dancing plague, there are reports of people in Strasbourg speaking about the curse of Saint Vitus. Some say the city has angered the saint. Others say individuals have been cursed for specific sins. When Frau Troffea begins dancing, the immediate interpretation is clear. She has been struck by Saint Vitus. And when others begin to dance, it confirms the belief. This is a divine plague, a supernatural punishment. This belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People who fear the curse are more likely to succumb to it. The mind, primed by expectation and terror, produces the very symptoms it fears. Psychologists call this the nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo effect. If you believe a curse will strike you, your body may manifest that curse even in the absence of any physical cause. The city authorities, influenced by this belief, make their catastrophic decision to encourage the dancing. They believe they are appeasing Saint Vitus, that by honoring the dance, they can satisfy the saint and end the curse. They build stages, they hire musicians, they turn the affliction into a ritual. But instead of curing the dancers, they feed the collective delusion. They give the curse social legitimacy, and the dancing intensifies. By early August, the dancing plague reaches its terrible zenith. 400 people are dancing in Strasbourg. The city is paralyzed. The economy has collapsed. Food supplies are dwindling. Disease is spreading among the exhausted, malnourished population. The streets are filled with the dying and the dead. And still, the dancers move. The scenes are apocalyptic. Dancers collapse in heaps on the stages. Their bodies are dragged to the edges of the squares and left in piles. Some are still alive, twitching and moaning. Others are corpses. The distinction becomes hard to make. Medical attendants move among them, offering water, trying to provide comfort, but there is little they can do. The dancers refuse to drink, refuse to eat. They only want to move. At night, the city becomes something out of a nightmare. Torches flicker in the darkness. The sound of drums and pipes echoes off the stone walls. Shadows dance on the facades of buildings, grotesque and distorted. The dancers move like marionettes, their limbs jerking and flailing, their faces blank or contorted with pain. People who witness it describe a feeling of unreality, as if they have stepped out of the normal world and into some cursed parallel dimension. Families try everything to save their loved ones. They tie them to beds, they lock them in rooms, but the dancers break free. They smash through doors, they tear at their restraints with inhuman strength. The compulsion is too powerful. It overrides pain, exhaustion, reason. Some families give up. They simply watch as their loved ones dance themselves to death. Others flee the city, unable to bear witness any longer. The death toll is difficult to calculate. Historical records are incomplete and contradictory. Some accounts suggest 15 people died per day at the height of the plague. If this is accurate, the total death toll could have been in the hundreds. But exact numbers are lost to history. What is certain is that many people died, and that their deaths were slow, agonizing, and public. In late August, the city authorities finally abandoned their disastrous policy of encouraging the dancing. The stages are dismantled, the musicians are dismissed, the guild halls are closed. The council, recognizing that their strategy has failed, turns to the church for help. A decision is made to remove the dancers from the city entirely. They are loaded onto carts and wagons, their bodies still twitching and moving, and transported to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus in the nearby mountains. The shrine is located in a grotto, a sacred space where pilgrims have come for centuries to seek healing. The hope is that removing the dancers from the urban environment, from the music and the crowds and the stages, will break the spell, and that the direct intervention of Saint Vitus, in his own holy place, will provide a cure. The journey is grim. The dancers are strapped down to prevent them from injuring themselves or others. Some die en route, their hearts giving out after weeks of continuous movement. Those who survive are carried into the grotto and laid before the altar. Priests perform rituals. They pray. They make offerings. They invoke Saint Vitus to lift his curse. And slowly, gradually, the dancing begins to stop. It does not end all at once. The recovery is uneven. Some dancers fall into deep sleep and wake hours later, dazed and confused. Others continue to move for days, their motions growing weaker and slower until they finally cease. A few relapse, beginning to dance again before finally surrendering to stillness. But one by one, the afflicted return to themselves. By early September, the dancing plague is over. The streets of Strasbourg are silent once more. The stages are gone. The music has stopped. The city begins the slow, painful process of rebuilding. Families bury their dead. Businesses reopen. Markets resume. Life returns to something resembling normalcy. But the city is forever changed. The memory of those weeks in the summer of 1518 will haunt Strasbourg for generations. In the months and years that follow, the people of Strasbourg struggle to make sense of what happened. The Church declares the plague a divine warning. Sermons emphasize repentance, piety, and obedience to God. Shrines to Saint Vitus are erected throughout the city. Pilgrimages to the mountain grotto become common. The city council passes laws to prevent future outbreaks, though what those laws entail is unclear. Some historians suggest they banned public dancing or restricted the hiring of musicians, but the records are vague. What is clear is that the dancing plague leaves deep psychological scars. Survivors speak of the experience in hushed tones, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might summon the affliction back. Some describe feeling as if they were trapped inside their own bodies, watching helplessly as their limbs moved without their consent. Others have no memory of the dancing at all, only blank spaces in their minds where days or weeks should be. Still others are left with permanent physical damage, chronic pain, damaged hearts, feet that never fully heal. The city itself bears scars. The economy takes years to recover. The population declines as people flee and do not return. Trust in the authorities erodes. How could the city council have been so foolish? How could they have encouraged the dancing instead of stopping it? These questions linger, and they fuel resentment and anger that simmers beneath the surface of Strasbourg society for decades. But perhaps the deepest scar is existential. The dancing plague shatters the illusion of human control. For centuries, people have believed that they are masters of their own bodies, that their will is sovereign. But the plague reveals a terrifying truth. The mind can betray the body. The self can fracture. Free will can vanish. And when that happens, there is nothing anyone can do. No medicine, no prayer, no authority, just chaos and waiting. More than 500 years later, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of history's most unsettling mysteries. We have theories, we have speculation, but we do not have answers, not definitive ones. The truth is lost in the fog of time, buried beneath layers of incomplete records, conflicting accounts, and cultural assumptions that no longer exist. What we do know is this. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, hundreds of people danced until they could no longer stand. Some danced until they died. It was not a celebration. It was not a riot. It was a compulsion, a breaking of the human spirit under unbearable strain. And it happened in plain sight, witnessed by thousands, documented by scribes and chroniclers who struggled to describe what they were seeing. The dancing plague is not unique in history. Similar outbreaks occurred in medieval Europe, though none as large or as deadly. Dancing manias were reported in Germany, the Netherlands, Italy. In some cases, they were attributed to religious fervor, in others, to demonic possession, in still others, to inexplicable madness. These events cluster in times of social stress, famine, war, plague, economic collapse. They emerge when communities are pushed beyond their breaking point. This suggests something profound about human psychology. We are not as stable as we believe. Our sense of self, our control over our bodies, our grasp on reality, all of it is more fragile than we want to admit. Under the right conditions, the right combination of stress, fear, and suggestion, the mind can shatter. And when it does, the results can be terrifying. The dancing plague also reveals the power of belief. In 1518, people believed in curses, in divine punishment, in the vengeful power of saints, and those beliefs shaped reality. They turned psychological distress into physical compulsion. They transformed individual suffering into collective nightmare. The dancers were not faking. They were not lying. They genuinely could not stop. Their belief in the curse made it real. This is not superstition. It is neuroscience. The brain is a prediction machine. It uses beliefs, expectations, and cultural narratives to interpret sensory input and generate behavior. When those narratives are powerful enough, they can override conscious control. They can produce symptoms that have no physical cause. They can make the impossible real. The dancing plague feels like ancient history, a relic of a superstitious, pre-scientific age, but its echoes reverberate in the modern world. Mass psychogenic illness still occurs. In 2011, in upstate New York, a group of high school students developed tics, seizures, and verbal outbursts. Doctors could find no medical cause. The symptoms spread through social contagion. In 2012, in El Carmen de Bolivar, Colombia, dozens of teenage girls experienced fainting, nausea, and difficulty breathing after receiving a vaccine. Medical investigations found no link to the vaccine. The illness was psychological. These modern outbreaks follow the same pattern as the dancing plague. They emerge in communities under stress. They spread through suggestion and imitation. They produce real, debilitating symptoms, and they resist conventional medical treatment. The details change, the symptoms change, but the underlying mechanism remains the same. The human mind, under pressure, can generate illness out of belief. The dancing plague also raises questions about social responsibility. The city of Strasbourg made the crisis worse by encouraging the dancing. They turned a psychological emergency into a public spectacle. They validated the affliction and gave it permission to spread. This is a cautionary tale about the power of social narratives, about how communities respond to crises, about the dangers of groupthink and the importance of evidence-based decision-making. In an age of social media, where information and misinformation spread at the speed of light, the lessons of the dancing plague are more relevant than ever. Collective delusions can still take hold, panics can still spread, and the line between belief and reality can still blur. The tools have changed, the human mind has not. When the dancing finally stopped in early September of 1518, the silence that descended on Strasbourg was profound. For weeks, the city had been filled with sound, the pounding of feet, the wailing of families, the relentless rhythm of drums and pipes. And then, suddenly, nothing. The stages were empty, the streets were empty, the city held its breath, afraid that the slightest sound might summon the plague back. That silence was not peace. It was exhaustion. It was grief. It was the silence of a community that has stared into the abyss and barely survived. People moved through the streets like ghosts, their eyes hollow, their faces drawn. They did not speak of what had happened. They could not. There were no words for it. In the weeks that followed, Strasbourg buried its dead. Mass graves were dug outside the city walls. Priests performed hurried funerals. Families mourned in private, ashamed of the deaths, afraid of the stigma. To have a loved one die in the dancing plague was to admit they had been cursed, to admit they had been touched by something dark and inexplicable. It was easier to stay silent, to forget, to move on. But the city could not forget. The dancing plague became a ghost that haunted Strasbourg. It appeared in sermons, in cautionary tales told to children, in whispered warnings. Do not anger the saints. Do not stray from righteousness. Do not dance. The plague became a symbol, a reminder of what happens when God's order breaks down, when humanity loses control. And in the centuries that followed, as Strasbourg grew and changed, as the medieval city gave way to modernity, the story of the dancing plague faded. It became legend, then myth, then a curious footnote in history books. But it never disappeared entirely, because the questions it raised never went away. What does the dancing plague tell us about being human? It tells us that we are fragile, that the line between sanity and madness is thinner than we want to believe, that our control over ourselves is conditional, that belief shapes reality in ways we cannot fully understand, and that when communities break down, when the structures that hold us together collapse, anything can happen. It tells us that suffering can manifest in strange ways, that trauma does not always look like we expect, that sometimes the mind protects itself by breaking, by dissociating, by turning inward and shutting the world out. The dancers of Strasbourg were not possessed by demons. They were possessed by their own pain, by hunger, by fear, by helplessness. And their bodies, in a desperate attempt to escape unbearable reality, chose to move, to dance, to burn themselves out rather than face another day of suffering. It tells us that history is full of mysteries that will never be solved, that the past is not a tidy narrative with clear causes and effects, that sometimes things happen that defy explanation, and that we have to live with that uncertainty. We have to accept that we do not have all the answers, that we never will. But most of all, the dancing plague tells us that we are connected, that we share our suffering, that what afflicts one person can spread to many, that communities are bound together not just by joy and celebration, but by pain and fear, and that in times of crisis, we need compassion, we need understanding. We need to resist the urge to turn suffering into spectacle. We need to remember that behind every mysterious illness, every strange behavior, every inexplicable event, there are human beings, fragile, frightened, struggling to survive. The dancing plague of 1518 is not just a historical curiosity. It is a mirror. It reflects back to us our deepest fears about ourselves, about what we might become if pushed too far, about the darkness that lives inside all of us, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. And it reminds us that silence, when it finally comes, is not always a blessing. Sometimes it is the sound of a wound that will never fully heal. The people of Strasbourg danced, and then they fell silent. And in that silence, they carried their trauma forward, into the next generation, and the next, and the next, until it became part of the city's soul, a ghost that never left, a memory that never faded, a warning that still whispers across the centuries. Do not forget. Do not ignore. Do not look away. Because it could happen again. It has happened before, and it will happen again. Not in the same way, not with dancing, but with something else, some other breaking, some other plague of the mind. And when it does, we will ask the same questions, we will search for the same answers, and we will find the same silence. The night an entire town moved as if possessed, then fell silent, was not an ending. It was a beginning, the beginning of a question that has never been answered, the beginning of a mystery that has never been solved, the beginning of a silence that has never been broken. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you can still hear them, the dancers of Strasbourg, their feet pounding against stone, their breath ragged in the darkness, their bodies moving against their will, dancing, always dancing, until the music stops, until the curse lifts, until the silence comes. And then, nothing. Only the echo of footsteps, only the memory of movement, only the ghost of a city that danced itself to death and somehow, impossibly, survived. This is the story of the dancing plague. This is the story of human fragility. This is the story of a night that should never have happened, but did, and always will, in memory, in warning, in the silence that followed. And in that silence, we are left with a single, haunting thought. If it happened to them, could it happen to us? If an entire city could lose control, could we? If 400 people could dance themselves to death, what stops us from doing the same? What keeps us tethered to sanity? What keeps us safe? The answer, perhaps, is nothing. Nothing but luck. Nothing but circumstance. Nothing but the fragile structures of society that hold us together. And when those structures fail, when the pressure becomes too great, when the world stops making sense, we too might find ourselves moving. Compelled by forces we cannot understand, dancing to music only we can hear, until we collapse, until we die, until the silence comes. This is what the dancing plague teaches us. This is its legacy. This is its warning. And this is why, more than 500 years later, we still tell this story. We still search for answers. We still listen for the echo of footsteps in the dark. Because somewhere, deep inside, we know. We know that we are not so different from the dancers of Strasbourg. We know that we too could break. We know that we too could be possessed. Not by demons, not by curses, but by our own minds, by our own fear, by our own desperate need to escape. And when that day comes, when the music starts, when the dancing begins, will we have the strength to stop? Or will we too dance until we fall silent? Only time will tell. Only history will know. And history, as the dancing plague reminds us, is full of silences that speak louder than words.